Hello, I'm Elowen. I was just supposed to serve drinks and stay invisible at my own brother's wedding. That's what they told me. That's how they wanted it. But when I tried to sit for a second, the bride, my soon-to-be sister-in-law, yanked my chair away. I hit the ground hard. She looked down and whispered, "Stay with the help." Everyone saw. No one said a word. But then, her father stood up, and everything changed. Because 5 years ago, I saved that man's life on a rainy Georgia highway, and none of them ever knew. Until now. What happens when the one they try to silence finally speaks? I arrive at my brother Bryn's wedding early, before the sun sets over the live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Charleston's humid air carries salt from the nearby harbor, mingling with the scent of gardenias. I smooth the modest blue linen dress Mom gave me, one she said would work anywhere, even when I didn't want to stand out. I'm not on the guest list. My name isn't on the place cards. Still, I stand at the entrance of the colonial-style venue, clutching the mother's ring on my finger. Valora's gift, a promise that I would stay true even when everyone else forgot me. I was asked to help around, they said, serve drinks, seat people, hand out programs. It stings, but I accept because it's Bryn's day, because holding my tongue has been easier than being right. The estate's veranda overlooks the marsh, wooden floors polished, guests in silk gowns, bow ties, champagne flutes clinking. I walk past them, lifted trays in hand, matching smiles. None of the guests greet me. Some glance, children stare. I taste a hollow in my chest as I set a glass down. I'm not invisible, just shifted aside. At the vintage guest chart by the entrance, I search for Elowen. It isn't there. I look again. No Elowen. I find names of distant cousins, co-workers, friends of friends, but not mine. A woman pushing past drops a guest book. I bend to pick it up. One of her heels nicked the hem of my dress. She doesn't say sorry. I trace the name Bryn Montgomery on the chart. Nothing beneath it for me. Humiliation blooms quietly. Bryn appears beside me, his posture stiff. He doesn't look at me. He clears his throat. "Elowen," he says, voice low. "Please, just don't make this day complicated. Let Callista have her moment." He gives me that polite look people give someone whose feelings don't matter. I want to tell him, this day was always ours, too. Our mother's voice still in my ears reminding me I wasn't less. I nod anyway. I force out a smile. I say softly, "I understand." But inside, I burn. He was the one who helped me move out of Mom's house 2 years ago, loaded boxes into his truck while I cried, promising with his rough hands, "You'll never be alone." I held that promise tight. Now it feels like a thread unraveling. I linger near the back of the yard. Twilight creeps up. Lanterns flicker on white pillars. I pull the ring from my finger for a moment. Valora's initials engraved inside, VELORA. It's the only piece of Mom I carry with me in full. I slip it back, palm warm. It anchors me. Callista glides by in white silk, crystal earrings at her ears, laughter trailing behind her. Bryn walks beside her. They stop, embrace. I watch from behind ferns, concealed by foliage, but everything in me exposed. My heart pulses, a tide of anger, shame, longing. I take a breath. I decide not to run. I take a seat behind the side wall, partly hidden by creeping ivy. The chatter, the soft clinks of glass, the distant scrape of chairs, it all pulses around me. I sit straight, shoulders back. I steel my spine. And just as I reach for my water, I see someone walking toward me with a forced smile, and something in her eyes tells me this wasn't over. I didn't notice the warmth shift at first, just the weight of a stare. As dusk settled over the gardens and lanterns flickered to life, I felt the tension shift in the air. My hand, still holding the water glass, trembled slightly, not from cold, but because I knew something was coming. Callista, smiling too wide, her heels clicking on the stone path, approached me. She held up a folded dress, ultra-white, its lace still fresh from dry cleaning. "Oh my gosh," she said, voice sugary. "You got the wrong package. That dress is for the servers." She tilted her head. The vendor dropped it over here by mistake. I stared at the fabric. It was the one the wedding planner had given me. Satin panels, subtle floral embroidery. I had tested it that morning. Got compliments from no one who mattered. My throat caught. I opened my mouth to say something, that I had received it legitimately, but another woman stepped forward, arms crossed. "We were looking for that. That's our uniform," she said, holding the dress. She raised an eyebrow. "Uniform, you know." Callista laughed lightly, not ashamed. "See? Easy mistake." Laughter from guests nearby. A buzzing whisper passed through the crowd. Someone spilled wine. The candles flickered. I swallowed, stepping back, making room for the cluster of people gathered around the confusion. My cheeks burning, not as much from heat as from the shame. I didn't argue. I walked behind a side door labeled "Staff Only," palms slick. The air in that small rear corridor smelled of old wood and cleaning solvent. I shed the dress she claimed was wrong, tried to shrug off the damp shame. The mirror leaned against a wall. I saw the Elowen who once believed she belonged. Now this stranger staring back, pressed into a uniform. Button by button, I fastened the coat. The fabric was scratchy. The reflections blurred. How had I allowed this? Inside, linens were being straightened. Servers passed trays filled with hors d'oeuvres. Music drifted in. Soft strings and laughter. I carried a tray too, pretending my role was intentional. I smiled at a guest offering handshakes and congratulations that were never meant for me. My back prickled. At the reception tent, someone guided me to a small wooden table pushed close to the kitchen doors, where heat and bustle never ceased. I sat among waitstaff whose faces were kind but apologetic. They looked at me like I was misplaced. One of them, Zinnia, slid a glass of water across. Her lips barely moved. "Are you family?" she whispered. I bit my lip. I couldn't say yes. My fingers trembled around the stem of the water glass. Callista drifted past, saw me, stopped just long enough to say quietly, "Hope you enjoy your table. It's intimate." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. The plates clinked, napkins rustled. My heart pounded, and I focused on Zinnia's kindness, how she didn't turn her back. She reached behind me and swapped my water for a flute of champagne, the bubbles rising fast as if mocking my stillness. I raised the glass, unsure what to toast. I walked out onto the balcony, stepping through the double doors. The moon was rising, pale ache in the sky. Salt air from the marsh whipped my hair. I stood leaning over the railing, quiet among cicadas singing above. In that moment, my mind returned to Mom's voice. Valora used to say, "You were born to walk through fire, not away from it." She said that when the walls closed in, and when I felt too small to matter. I breathe in the humid air, lift my chin, let the breeze flutter the ribbon on my dress. I glance back toward the tent where laughter now sounds too loud. The lights inside wink, cast shadows. I feel anger gnawed in my throat, not loud, but roaring. And that was the moment I realized. I wasn't just being excluded, I was being erased. The evening pressed down warm and heavy, as though the sky itself had lowered to watch the spectacle. Twilight bled into night, and lanterns strung along the garden paths began to glow, their golden light trembling in the humid air. Guests moved about in clusters, laughter carrying on the breeze like champagne bubbles, light, fleeting, but sharp when they burst. I lingered just beyond the last row of white folding chairs, my clutch pressed tightly against my ribs, my breath slow and deliberate. I could have been mistaken for a statue, one more ornamental figure tucked behind ivy and ribbon. Everyone else slipped seamlessly into place. Hugs, air kisses, congratulatory smiles shared like currency. I watched as bracelets clinked against champagne flutes, as perfumed hands brushed away strands of hair in perfectly timed gestures. No one reached for me. No smile tilted my way. The silence of their omission cut sharper than words ever could. A waiter brushed past with a tray of bubbling glasses, nearly clipping my elbow. The scent of citrus peel and cold wine lingered. I swallowed hard, adjusting the strap of my blue linen dress, reminding myself, I belonged here. Maybe not in the way they wanted, but I belonged nonetheless. Then came the usher, stiff smile, hand out, gesturing me toward the furthest back row. The seat tucked in the shadows, out of sight, where the ribbons were fraying and the gravel showed through the grass. I walked obediently, heels crunching on stone, and began to lower myself into the chair. But before I settled, I felt the sudden jerk. The sharp tug of wood against my calves, the seat yanked backward. My body pitched down without warning. In one frozen instant, I saw sky, lanterns, faces, all spinning, and then gravity took me. My hip struck the stone garden path. My glass of champagne flew from my hand, the fizz arcing bright in the lamplight before the flute shattered across stone. Sticky warmth soaked my shoe as the bubbles hissed and died. The silence that followed was brief, but brutal. Gasps rippled across the seated guests. Conversations faltered. Someone covered their mouth. A child's voice piped up, "Why is she on the ground?" And the mother's quick, sharp shh was louder than the child's curiosity. And above me, framed by the glow of lanterns, stood Callista. Her smile was razor-thin, rehearsed cruelty in every inch. She leaned just close enough so her words landed clear, her tone ringing across the nearby rows. "Careful. Maybe just stay with the help." Laughter didn't follow. Only the soft, embarrassed coughs of people pretending they hadn't heard. But her words cut anyway, slicing deeper than the fall had bruised my knees. The phrase lodged like glass splinters. Stay with the help. Heat flared across my cheeks. My throat closed so tight I could hardly breathe. I forced myself upright, fingers scraping grit and dirt from my dress. My hem was torn where it caught on the chair. My palm bled faintly where a shard of glass had grazed it. For a fleeting second, I caught Bryn's eyes. His face flickered, shock, then something that almost looked like guilt, but he looked away too quickly, his gaze fixed instead on the rose-covered archway, pretending not to notice me at all. No arm reached out, no voice said my name. I didn't cry, I didn't speak. I simply turned, silent, slipping out through a side arch draped in ivy. My footsteps sounded too loud on the gravel path. Behind me, laughter and conversation swelled again, the crowd folding over my absence like a wound trying to heal too quickly. Beyond the archway, the sea wind carried salt and damp earth. The air smelled of jasmine and brine. I pressed my palm flat against the cool stone wall, trying to steady the drumbeat of my heart. I could still hear it. The shattering glass, the sharp gasp, Callista's voice slicing me open in front of everyone. When I found the ladies' restroom, dim sconces framed a long mirror. My reflection jolted me. Dirt streaked my skirt. Tiny shards glittered faintly in my hair. But what startled me most wasn't the disarray. It was the face itself, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, not sad but blazing. For the first time, I didn't see the dutiful daughter, the quiet cousin, the girl who fetched plates and folded napkins while Celine posed for photographs. I saw the child I once was, small, wearing faded overalls, sitting beneath the magnolia tree with tears streaking her cheeks after classmates mocked her hand-me-down shoes. That child looked back at me now from the mirror, accusing, reminding. And then another memory surfaced, uninvited but clear. Bryn, years ago, shouldering his backpack at the end of the driveway. Older kids jeered, calling him names, saying he'd grown weak. I had stepped forward then, voice trembling but certain. Anyone touches my brother, they deal with me. They had backed off. Bryn had smiled at me then, hurt but proud. He defended me too. We were supposed to stand for each other. I opened my eyes, staring at the reflection that wasn't just dirt and disheveled fabric, but something harder, sharper. The humiliation tonight had broken something open, but not in the way Callista intended. Not in the way Bryn's silence suggested I should accept. I wasn't broken entirely. I smoothed the hem of my dress, straightened my shoulders, and turned from the mirror. My hands trembled, so I pressed them against the fabric. Not to clean them, but to remind myself they were real, solid, mine. I left the restroom, moving past servers balancing silver trays, past muffled laughter behind closed doors. The lantern light was waiting for me outside, warm but sharper now, no longer forgiving. I didn't take my seat in the back row. I didn't shrink into the shadows where they wanted me hidden. I stood instead near the entrance of the tent, arms folded tight, watching the glittering crowd like a sentinel. My silence wasn't retreat anymore. It was armor, and just when I thought I couldn't take another second, when the weight of being unseen pressed hardest against my ribs, someone called my name. The sound of my name slipped through the air, soft, deliberate, and undeniable. I turned on instinct, my arms folding across my chest like a shield, as if the syllables themselves might bruise me. There he stood. An older man in a navy suit, his shoulders squared with quiet dignity, his face lined with years I could almost trace with my eyes. The lantern strung along the garden path caught the edges of his silver hair, making him look almost illuminated. My pulse stuttered, and I felt a jolt of recognition that wasn't recognition at all. Just the unsettling certainty that this moment mattered. "You're Elwyn, right?" he asked. His voice carried no mockery, no venom, none of the polished cruelty I'd been enduring all evening. It was steady, careful, as though each word had been weighed and carried across miles just to find me. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My throat closed. My eyes flicked over his face again, but nothing came immediately. Only a fog of confusion and a quiet, trembling hope. I nodded, though my voice lagged behind. He stepped closer, his presence a steady warmth in the cool night air. "You were there," he said, his tone sharpening with memory. "The accident, 5 years ago." The words cracked open something I had tried to bury. A stillness fell over me, as if the lantern-lit garden had gone mute. The laughter from nearby tables dimmed, the clinking of silverware faded. For a moment, all I could hear was rain, the memory of it pounding against glass, drumming against earth. I was back there. Savannah, late October. A storm tearing across the highway, headlights flickering like dying stars through sheets of water. I remembered the acrid smell, burning rubber, leaking gasoline, the sting of smoke thick in my throat. The car had flipped, its metal skeleton crumpled grotesquely against the guardrail. People stood at a distance, frozen by the violence of it, by the heat that shimmered off the wreck. But something in me refused to stand still. I crawled toward the wreckage, gravel biting into my knees, my scarf unraveling as I tore it free. His door was crushed inward, smoke spilling from the seams. Flames crackled near the gas tank, threatening to consume the entire vehicle. My hands shook, but I pressed them against his skin, against the wound. I whispered prayers I didn't fully believe as I dragged him from the wreckage, my lungs burning, my arms screaming. Seconds later, the tank erupted in fire, sparks showered into the night sky, and I left before anyone asked my name. I never wanted to be seen. Now here he was, alive, standing before me in the glow of lanterns and music, his eyes locked on mine, unflinching. "Sir," I managed at last, my voice trembling with the weight of 2 timelines colliding. "I didn't know you then." He exhaled slowly, as though releasing a burden carried far too long. "I've been searching for you," he said. "For years. That night. Everyone said no one could have survived. But I did. Because of you." The words hit me harder than the fall earlier, harder than Callista's cruel taunts, harder than the silence of my family as they let me drown in humiliation. My chest ached. My lips parted, but no sound came. Guests nearby had noticed. Forks hovered in midair, conversations stilled, faces turned toward us, curiosity written in raised brows and tilted heads. Some looked startled, others suspicious. And then, across the garden, I saw her, Callista. Her posture stiffened, her laugh sliced off mid-breath. Her practiced smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, but I saw it. I saw the mask slip. I felt dozens of eyes pressing into me, phones lifted discreetly, camera flashes blinking in the corner of my vision. A part of me wanted to shrink again, to disappear into shadow like I always had. But his hand, a steady, weathered hand, settled lightly on my shoulder, and his words cut through the fog. "You don't deserve what they're doing to you." My breath caught, my chest tightened with the force of it. He didn't say I'm sorry or ignore them. He said what no one else had ever said to me out loud, that the cruelty wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve it. Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I blinked them back. This was not the time to collapse. This was the time to stand taller. I nodded, gratitude trembling in my throat, too fragile to speak aloud. He didn't press me for explanation. He didn't ask why I had left the scene that night, or why I had stayed silent for so long. He simply stood beside me, a presence strong enough to steady my shaking hands. For the first time all evening, I didn't feel like an afterthought. Across the lawn, Callista's eyes darted, searching. She leaned toward our mother, who whispered something sharp and urgent. They looked smaller now, their elegance punctured by something raw. For once, it wasn't me on display. It was them. I inhaled deeply, straightened my shoulders, and let the truth settle inside me like a stone at the bottom of a river. I was no longer afraid of being seen. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Stay close. I have something to say before this wedding begins." His words hummed with purpose, heavy with promise. The cicadas droned in the trees, the lanterns flickered in the humid breeze, and inside me, something shifted irrevocably. I realized then, as the crowd held its collective breath, as my heart pounded steady and strong, I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I steadied myself as I brushed the crumbs from my fingertips, the dull ache in my ankle still pulsing faintly where gravel had scraped my skin. The sting was nothing compared to the throb in my chest, but I acknowledged it anyway. It was a reminder I was still standing. I gathered the loose strands of hair that clung to my damp cheeks and tucked them behind my ear. Then I stood taller, straighter. When I stepped back through the entrance of the tent, the air seemed to shift. Conversation dipped and stilled. Waiters balancing trays faltered mid-stride, their polished shoes squeaking against the wooden floor. Guests craned their necks toward me, their smiles faltering into curious half-expressions. A whisper rippled like a gust of wind through the rows of white-draped tables. "Is that her?" I didn't flinch. I kept my chin leveled, my spine elongated, my breath measured as I walked down the center aisle between tables. A glass of champagne trembled faintly in my hand, but I held it steady as if it were part of the performance. The satin linen stretched in perfect folds across each table, silver cutlery catching the candlelight and sending little shards of brightness flickering across faces. The air was thick with roses and gardenia perfume, threaded through with laughter and wine. I slipped into a seat, not at the front, where Callista's circle of benefactors basked in self-importance, and not hidden in the last row, where I'd been told to belong. I sat in the middle, visible, watchful, a place where I could not be ignored. The evening program pressed forward. One by one, guests stood with glasses raised, making toasts to Bryn and Callista. Words like love, hope, family, and legacy swirled through the golden glow of the tent. I raised my glass politely each time, nodding with a practiced smile, though each syllable pressed heavier against my chest. They were words that included everyone, except me, and as I sat there, one memory burned louder than the rest. Exactly 2 weeks before tonight, 14 long nights, I had sent Callista an email. I had drafted it carefully, measured each sentence like I was walking across glass. "I want clarity," I'd written. "I want to understand why I'm being singled out, why I'm being asked to take on duties no one else is asked to do. I ask only to be treated with dignity." I knew the risks of sending it. I knew the likelihood of silence. And still, I watched the little read receipt confirm she had opened it. I waited. One day, then another. 2 weeks later, no reply. No acknowledgement. Nothing. The silence was its own verdict, its own blade. It had cut deeper than any insult she could have spoken. And now she was gliding toward me. I caught sight of her silk dress brushing the floor, her heels clicking like punctuation against the marble tiles. Callista's smile glimmered beneath the chandelier light, poised, radiant, rehearsed. She approached my table like a queen humoring a subject. I stood to meet her, my glass tight in my hand. My voice emerged steady but firm, sharpened by the months of swallowed humiliation. "Callista," I said, not raising my volume, but enough for those nearest to hear. 2 weeks ago, I asked you, in writing, to treat me with respect, to stop sending me notes at the last minute, to include me in what everyone else is included in. I warned you then. I told you I would not stay silent forever. Her expression flickered, just slightly, before the curve of her smirk returned. She leaned in close, her perfume wrapping around me, gardenia laced with something metallic, like iron or blood. Her whisper was venom wrapped in silk. Well, it seems you're making noise now. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing. You really want to make this about you? On my day, you'll regret that. The microphone at a nearby table caught the edge of her words. Several heads turned. I saw Bryn's gaze snap toward us, not with warmth, not with brotherly defense, but with confusion, maybe annoyance. His eyes didn't say congratulations. They said, "Why are you disrupting this?" That was when something inside me shifted. The anger I had bottled for years, the shame I had forced into silence, the loneliness I had mistaken for resilience, all of it reassembled into something else. Not rage, focus. I turned from Callista without another word, letting the weight of her threat fall useless behind me. I walked out of the tent, the flap of canvas rustled as I passed through, and the warm night air enveloped me like a baptism. The cicadas sang loud in the magnolia trees, petals drifting pale against the lamplight. I stopped beneath one tree, its blossoms ghost white against the dark sky. Slowly, with both hands, I untied the apron I had been wearing all evening, the crisp, starched symbol of servitude, of help. The role I had been shoved into by blood and by habit. I folded it carefully, not like something discarded, but like something I was choosing to release. I placed it on the nearest chair and stepped back, my chest rising and falling as if I had just dropped a burden I'd carried since childhood. I may have been born last in this family, I whispered to the humid air, my voice low but fierce, but I won't leave last. The words trembled at first, then steadied, rooting themselves into me. I pulled my phone from my clutch. Its screen glowed against my face. My thumb hovered only a second before I typed, "Valora, need advice. This isn't just hurt anymore. It's a pattern." I hit send. Then I leaned back against the magnolia trunk, feeling the rough bark catch against the fabric of my dress. The petals fell in delicate spirals around me, catching in my hair, dusting my lap. From the tent, laughter spilled out now and then, tinny, distant, like echoes from a world I was no longer bound to. My anger wasn't the wild storm I once feared it would be. It wasn't a wave crashing against cliffs, leaving me gasping. Tonight, it was quieter, sharper, refined. A knife instead of a flood. I wasn't just someone who endured anymore. I was someone who would act. And then, just before dinner was served, my phone buzzed again. The vibration hummed against my palm. A new message, one that made my breath stop, one that promised everything was about to change. The buzz of my phone startled me like a sudden draft in a sealed room. The sound was small, ordinary, but in that moment it felt enormous, like a bell announcing a shift in the night. I turned, my clutch trembling faintly in my hands, the screen lit against the dusk's soft gloom, glowing cold blue. My chest tightened, and I already knew, even before I opened it, that whatever waited there would change the air around me. The message was from Zinnia, a forwarded image. My pulse skipped as I tapped it open. The screenshot filled the screen, Callista's words sharp and clear, preserved like a fossil in digital amber. A text from her to her assistant, sent before the guests had even arrived. If she shows up, seat her with the help, or tell her she's not welcome at all. She'll get the hint. My hands went cold, my skin prickled as if I had been dunked in ice water. So it hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been a miscommunication. This wasn't some slip of protocol or a misunderstanding about roles. This had been written, calculated, intentional. It was malice dressed in the polite language of family authority. She had planned for me to be diminished, scripted my humiliation before I even set foot under the lanterns. For a moment, I simply stared at the words. The laughter of guests swelled inside the tent, muffled by the fabric walls. I could hear the clink of silverware against porcelain, the rustle of napkins folded into elegant shapes. Somewhere beyond, a violinist struck a high, lingering note that seemed to pierce directly through my chest. I remembered the way Callista had looked at me earlier. Her smile sweetened for the crowd, but her eyes razor-sharp when they locked on mine. A gaze that cut deeper when no one else was watching. Now I had proof that I wasn't imagining it. Proof that cruelty had been her intention all along. I tucked the phone back into my clutch and exhaled slowly, steadying my breath. I glanced once more toward the tent. Candlelight spilled across white linens, polished silver, and flushed cheeks. The scene looked almost holy from the outside, an altar to celebration. But I knew better. Behind the laughter was rot, and I would not let it pass quietly this time. I placed my champagne glass gently on a side table, its rim still catching droplets of condensation. Then I walked. My heels struck the gravel path in sharp beats as I moved past the corridors lined with lanterns. I passed the kitchen, where the air buzzed with clattering dishes and the low hum of servers working behind the scenes. The smell of garlic and butter wafted out, strangely grounding. Finally, I found Valora, my godmother. My mother's old friend, once the fiercest attorney I knew, now retired but still sharper than anyone else in the room. Her posture was calm, her expression measured, but when I showed her the screenshot, her brow furrowed into deep lines. She turned the phone toward the lantern light, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This," she whispered, voice steady as law itself, "is proof. Malice in black and white. She didn't just dismiss you, she plotted it." Her words cut through me, but they also steadied me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the pattern. It was here, captured, undeniable. Valora's eyes softened as she looked back at me. "Remember," she said gently, "you carry more than their name. You carry truth. That's heavier than any of their illusions." I nodded. My pulse quickened, but I no longer felt like prey. I felt like a witness preparing to testify. Valora promised to stay nearby, quiet in the background, ready if I needed her. She would be my witness, my ballast, my anchor in this room of polished lies. I returned to the reception tent, my steps slower now, deliberate. My heart thudded like a drum, but my face was calm, my shoulders pulled back. I slid into my seat near Bryn's table, close enough for him to feel the gravity of what I carried. He looked up mid-toast, his glass hovering, and froze when he caught sight of my expression. Without hesitation, I lifted the phone so he could see the screen. "Read it," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through the hum of conversation. "Read it, and then look me in the eye. Tell me I'm not part of this family." A hush spread. Glasses clinked awkwardly as hands faltered. Chairs creaked as people shifted, straining to hear. Bryn's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. He took the phone from me, his face blanching as his eyes scanned the words. Then slowly, he glanced at Callista. She had frozen, her composure flickering for the briefest second, eyes wide, lips parted in horror, before she forced her mask back into place. She stepped forward, her silk dress rustling. Her voice emerged polished but brittle beneath its shine. "This isn't how things are intended," she said, each syllable trembling with restraint. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Her lip curled faintly, a contempt she thought hidden. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I held Bryn's gaze, keeping my words crisp and clear. "The emails, the texts, every last one says I had no place here unless I served, unless I stayed invisible, unless I silently bore this weight while the rest of you drank and laughed." I paused, breathing steady. "Not anymore." Murmurs rippled like wind through tall grass. Guests exchanged glances, some frowning, some skeptical, some leaning in with wide-eyed curiosity. The fragile veil of the evening was tearing. Callista gave a sharp, derisive laugh. "Oh, please! You wanted this attention. You wanted everyone to look. Didn't you?" Her voice was high, too thin, too desperate to be convincing. The crowd shifted again. Whispers thickened. Phones glowed in hands. I could feel the room turning, not in my favor, not in hers, but toward something else entirely, toward truth. Valora stepped forward then, her presence commanding without theatrics. She stood beside me, calm as a judge, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "I've heard every whisper," she said, her voice low but steady, carrying easily in the hush. "I've seen every message. The pattern speaks louder than excuses." She tilted my phone toward the closest guests, letting them see for themselves. Let people decide who is honest, she said. The words landed like a gavel. I felt the tension in my chest coil and then release. My adrenaline surged, but for once I wasn't trembling. I let Bryn scroll through the texts himself, his lips pressed thin, his breath shallow. The silence around us was louder than any applause. Guests leaned in. Callista's mother gasped audibly. Someone at a nearby table clinked a glass nervously. Bryn stuttered, trying to form words. His confusion, his guilt, his loyalty, all of it wavered on his face. But I didn't wait for him to rescue me. I didn't need rescue. Valora squeezed my shoulder gently, a gesture of solidarity. Then I rose, slowly, deliberately. I stood not as a servant carrying trays or a shadow cast by someone else's light. I stood as myself, visible, undeniable, whole. The lantern glow no longer felt like a spotlight designed to shame me. It felt like revelation, peeling back layers of performance to reveal truth. I leaned toward Valora, my voice quiet but fierce. It's time. Then I turned toward the stage, my feet pressed firm against the floor, step after step, until the tense conversations thinned into silence. Faces followed me, eyes unblinking, phones lifted discreetly. No applause yet. No interruption. Just stillness. And in that stillness, I felt it. Power. The kind that doesn't need to shout, the kind that can, at last, be heard. I raised my hand and felt the cool metal of the microphone settle into my palm. My fingers trembled, yes, but not with fear. It was the tremor of long-stored resolve finally breaking loose, like a dam releasing water that had been waiting for years. The tent, moments ago alive with silver laughter, champagne bubbles, and the rustle of gowns, stilled as if on command. Even the violinist paused mid-phrase, bow suspended in the air. I stood beneath the glow of lanterns strung high across the tent poles, their golden light pressing against my skin until my cheeks burned. My heart pounded, but it was a steady rhythm now, no longer the frantic stutter of someone cornered. Every eye turned toward me, the way you turn toward a sudden flare in darkness. And for the first time, I felt the weight shift, from me carrying their silence to them carrying my truth. I let my gaze sweep the room. Bryn sat at the head table, hands folded, expression unreadable. Half stone, half boy I once knew. Callista lounged just across from him, lips pressed so tight they looked bloodless. She tilted her chin, feigning calm, but her eyes betrayed a flash of nerves. Guests who had smiled at me earlier with polite detachment now leaned forward in their chairs, exchanging glances, whispering as if afraid to miss the next line in a play they hadn't expected to see. The air was thick with roses arranged in tall glass vases, the scent almost cloying. Beneath it, I smelled something sharper, wood polish from the stage, the faint bite of wine, and a trace of regret I couldn't name. I inhaled deeply, grounding myself, then spoke. Weddings are meant to celebrate unity, I began, my voice steady even though my chest still quivered. But what happens when a family fractures around silence? The words dropped into the tent like stones into still water. A ripple spread through the crowd, someone cleared their throat, another's breath caught audibly. The violinist lowered his bow completely. I lifted my phone high, screen glowing in the dim light. These, I said, my voice ringing with quiet authority, are not mistakes. They are choices. On the screen were the texts, the emails, the screenshot Zinnia had sent me, the evidence of premeditated malice. Faces in the crowd shifted. I saw guests lean closer to one another, murmuring. A bridesmaid pressed her hand to her mouth. And then, to my astonishment, Zinnia herself stood. She walked toward me, her dress trembling against her knees, her hands small but firm as she clasped them in front of her. "It's true," she whispered, her voice carrying in the hush. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, the entire tent seemed to breathe as one, waiting. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. I turned toward Callista's father, the man whose life I had once saved on a rain-soaked highway 5 years ago. My voice broke slightly, but the words did not falter. 5 years ago, I said. I didn't know your name. I didn't imagine I would one day stand here, dismissed, humiliated, when I was the one who pulled you from fire. He stiffened, his face paling as recognition flickered across his features. His shoulders sagged beneath his tailored suit. His voice, when it came, was raw, stripped bare. "She saved my life," he said, almost to himself, then louder. "Before I ever knew her name, she saved me, and I let this happen?" Gasps burst through the tent like sparks. A bridesmaid lowered her champagne flute with trembling fingers. A cousin turned to his wife, whispering in disbelief. The ripple was no longer a whisper, it was a wave. Callista's mask cracked. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted, her posture stiffened as though she could still hold the performance together. She scoffed, her voice high, brittle. "This is ridiculous. She's not even part of the wedding party. This is my day, and she's making it about herself." But her words fell flat, sounding more like acid than grace. And then her father stood. His body trembled, but his voice was strong. "You made a mockery," he said, his gaze locked on his daughter. "A mockery of the woman who saved your father's life." The tent hushed again. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat, withdrew a folded check, the wedding gift, meant for Callista and Bryn. For a long second, he stared at it, jaw tight. Then, in front of everyone, he ripped it in half. The tearing of paper was sharp, final, echoing louder than any applause. Gasps scattered again, louder this time. Someone actually clapped a hand to their mouth. A murmur of shock ran through the rows of tables. Callista's face flamed red. Her lips parted, but no words came. She swallowed, chewed air, then closed her mouth with a stiff nod, the posture of someone stripped of excuses. Her composure, the thing she prized most, was unraveling thread by thread. Bryn rose from his chair too, hands trembling. For a heartbeat, I thought he might speak, might defend me, might finally acknowledge what he'd always known. But he stayed silent, his lips parting only to close again. His silence hurt, yes, but it was different this time. It was no longer the silence that erased me. It was the silence of someone unable to deny truth. I realized then, standing on that stage, that this wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It wasn't destruction either. It was revelation. Truth cracking open a carefully constructed lie. And in that truth, I felt myself standing clearer, taller. Zinnia came closer, her eyes brimming with tears. She reached for my hand, her voice breaking with sincerity. That was the strongest thing I've ever seen. Her words pierced me, but not in pain. They filled me with a fierce gratitude, wild and untamed, but also a sorrow that pressed deep. For all the years I had stayed quiet, for all the nights I had let shame write my story. I handed the microphone back to the stand, its metal clicking softly as it settled. My shoulders squared as I stepped down, each stride deliberate. I didn't look back at Callista. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of her humiliation behind me, the shifting gazes of the guests who no longer saw her as flawless. I passed Bryn's table. He looked up, his expression softer now, his eyes wet. He met my gaze for just a moment. He didn't speak, but he didn't look away either. For once, it was enough that he saw me. I slipped through the side exit, into the garden. The humid air wrapped around me, thick but strangely comforting. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the scent of magnolia blossoms and damp grass. The lamps outside cast long, elegant shadows of trees stretching across the lawn. And there, under the humid night, with the laughter and gasps of the tent fading behind me, I smiled. Not a mask, not a performance. A small, real smile. The kind that belongs to someone who has finally spoken. I stepped away from the resonance of silenced applause, leaving behind the tent where everyone had looked at me differently, some with pride, some with shock. The breeze near the shore cooled the sweat on my neck as dusk deepened into night. The marsh beyond whispers against salt air. I needed space. Guests began to murmur among themselves. Some slipped from their seats and approached me with eyes full of regret. A distant cousin touched my arm. "Elowen, I'm sorry I never saw." Her voice trailed off. Others avoided my gaze. Callista's family gathered their things. Her mother smoothing her gown, her father still clutching an empty hand where the gift check used to be. It felt like watching actors exit a stage after a scene that changed the story. Valora appeared at my elbow. She pressed a small, folded envelope into my hand. "Your mother gave this to me before she passed," she said, voice trembling a little. "She asked me to give it to you when the time was right." My fingers closed around the paper, thick with longing. Under the gentle wash of lantern light, I crept away from the crowd, toward a wooden bench by the shore. The water lapped faintly, the sky a tapestry of fading orange and lavender. I unfolded the letter, hands unsteady. Valora stood back, silent witness. Inside, Mom's handwriting curved across the page. "You may be the youngest, but you'll be the one who keeps our name honest. Speak even when they want you silent." Tears stung. My mother's few words carried more strength than any shouting ever could. The truth in them settled like a warm ember. For years, I buried those words under shame, under silence, under fear. But now, they burned bright again. I looked up. Bryn appeared at the edge of the bench where I sat. He hesitated, hands in pockets, moonlight casting long shadows across his face. "Elowyn," he murmured. I didn't respond immediately. The sea breeze played with stray hair. I could taste salt. I could feel everything. "I didn't know how to defend you, so I ignored you," he said, voice hoarse. He looked ashamed, older, quieter. "I thought if I said something, I'd lose something too." He reached out, but I stayed still. The apology wasn't enough, but it was something. "I hope one day you'll forgive me," he added. I held back tears, nodded once, my voice soft. "I hope one day you'll forgive yourself. Not for me, but for him." Later, dusk turned to dark. Callista's family slipped away quietly. Guests lingered, some exchanging gentle remarks, shifting plates, soft smiles. The night felt lighter, like a heavy coat removed. I did not hide in a corner. Instead, I remained among them, catching the laughter of friends, old and new, tasting the relief of belonging. Zinnia found me. She smiled, warm and true. "You should have been the bride," she joked, her voice low but sincere. I laughed. Real laughter, one that came from somewhere deep inside, where pain faded long enough for joy to ripple through. After the last glass of champagne, I drifted back to the tent, now empty, curtains drawn aside, chairs stacked. The clean lines of white cloth tables stood like witnesses. I spotted my mother's ring, set aside on a small table where no one expected me. I picked it up, the cold metal a familiar weight. I pressed it into my palm. "We're okay now," I whispered, half to the ring, half to myself. Moonlight filtered through the tent's opening. Shadows of trees danced. I felt whole, though not perfect. The scar from the fall still tingled under my dress hem. But it was mine. I had stood up, facing every whisper, every glance, every email unread. Healing doesn't come wrapped in applause. It arrives slowly, in the quiet spaces after the war. I stood on the edge of dawn, the sky pale lavender and soft, enough light to see the tent's silhouette behind me. I had slipped away after the last guests left, after laughter lost its sharp edge and the candles guttered. The gravel underfoot was cool. Salt air breezed in off the marsh, carrying the faint echo of waves. I clasped my mother's ring in my palm, the metal warm where my thumb rested. In the quiet hush, I felt everything I'd swallowed. The shame, the anger, the long nights replaying every cruel glance. But I also felt something new. A gentle peace that isn't loud, but enough. I turned and walked back toward the empty tent, boots crunching on pebbled path, my dress brushing past scattered rose petals still strewn from the night before. Inside, folding chairs stood upright, tables were cleared, soft linen sheets piled by the exit. I stepped in between them, the scent of roses lingering. I saw my reflection in a silver tray someone left on a side table, my face calm, eyes steady, not erased, not broken. I touched my hair, smoothing a stray strand. The scar on my knee tingled, a dull reminder carried by my dress hem. It had stung when I fell, but now it hums like proof that I stood up. Bryn found me there. He approached slowly, like he wasn't sure I'd want him close. "Elowyn," he said, voice low. "I've been thinking about what you said." His eyes were tired. I nodded, waiting. "I didn't see you," he admitted. "Not really. I let the image, the appearances get in the way. I thought if I defended you, I'd upset Callista, or lose something familiar." He paused. "You deserve better than being hidden." I let his words settle. The hurt doesn't disappear just because someone says sorry. But this time, I believed him. I studied his face, the regret lines, the softness. I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," I said. "That's a start." He couldn't make up for all he missed. Years of silence, emails unread, moments I needed a brother. But I could forgive enough to let go of what I carried alone. As morning light filtered through tent flaps, Valora appeared with coffee. She stood behind me, quiet strength in her presence. "Mom would be proud," she said softly. I smiled, the kind that rises from somewhere deep, not just polite reflex. "She always believed in speaking honestly," I replied. Outside, the birds stirred. The first fish boats moved out across the horizon. I thought about the days ahead, my studio, my art, my life beyond any reflection in someone else's glass. I felt ready. Some emails awaited me, apologies from distant relatives, messages from old friends who hadn't known what to say. I opened one. Bryn had written to tell me he shared what happened last night with his colleagues, that he spoke up for me. It was simple, not grand, but for me, it was a bridge built finally. I gathered my things. I stepped outside the tent, breathing the morning air. The sky was wide, brightening. I held the ring, and I held my head up. We're okay now. The scar stays, the hurt stays, but they don't define me anymore. Sometimes the loudest strength comes from refusing to stay silent. Elowyn's story reminds us that family should be a place of safety, not manipulation or shame. When the truth is buried long enough, it eventually fights its way to the surface. What would you have done in her place? Have you ever been treated like an outsider by your own family? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life tales of resilience, justice, and quiet revenge.